My most formative experience is that I've had 5 brain surgeries in my life. I was born with a brain condition called hydrocephalus, which means you have too much water around your brain.
Ties Boukema turned surgical survival into venture dominance. But even the sharpest minds miss million-dollar deals.
And we present the findings back. The founder goes, "This is amazing stuff, super useful, really blown away." But also I took money from Index 3 days ago, so maybe see you guys.
This isn't about replacing human relationships. It's about amplifying them beyond recognition.
I held the opinion quite strongly that really you should be able to take the human kind of out of a lot of pieces in private markets. I think relationships and humans are key and will remain key. The big opportunity, I think, is augment the human with technology.
The future belongs to those who embrace surgical level discipline. Even the world's elite know this truth.
And even Harvard neurosurgeons, where it's hard to make the case that they're not motivated, they're not smart, and they're not skilled, they increasingly rely on checklists and process.
Discover how surgical discipline meets AI advantage. The full story of Ties Boukema and Rolodex. Listen now.
We're hosting exclusive off-the-record LP AMAs, bringing together the people behind the capital who are shaping the next generation of venture funds. If you're in the middle of raising a fund or planning to and want to understand how LPs actually make decisions, this is the room you want to be in. No pitch decks, no posturing, no script. Just honest conversations between GPs and LPs. The upcoming AMA on the 21st of August is held by Jonathan Sibilia, partner at Bullhound Capital and one of Europe's most experienced LPs. Before Bullhound, he led fund-of-funds and secondaries at Molten Ventures for 16 years, deploying into 80+ VC funds and backing breakout names like UiPath, Revolut, and Ledger. Jonathan brings a rare dual lens of direct investments and secondaries across thousands of fund reviews and real DPI outcomes. This is your chance to ask one of Europe's sharpest LPs how they really assess managers, secondaries, exit strategies, and what most GPs still get wrong, or anything else you're dying to know. Access to these AMAs are limited to EUVC community members. Don't miss your chance to be in the room. Head to eu.vc/subscribe to save your seat.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to EUVC, the podcast championing the true narrative of European venture, showcasing the breadth, depth, and ambition of our ecosystem. Today, we have Ties Boukema with us. Ties is the head of data, tech, and AI at Dawn Capital. Dawn Capital has a fund of roughly $700 million US, so that's 620 or so euros. Their AUM is close to $2 billion, HQ'd in London, focusing Series A and Series B. Their focus geography is Europe, so of course, very much aligned with the ethos of our little podcast here. Very much focused on B2B software and fintech. Some of the notable investments, and in this case, all of these notable investments are unicorns, which we can't say with all of our guests, so that's kind of cool. We have Dataiku, Contexa, Mimecast, Minute Media, iZettle, Tink, Neo4j, and of course, there's many other notable investments, but I'll leave it at that. Ties, do you want to add anything that I left out that you think is incredibly important to mention?
I think the most important thing to mention is that I'm very excited to be here. It's quite surreal to be on the podcast. That's my favorite, sort of commuting podcast, which is also pretty much the only type of podcast I listen to. In terms of Dawn, I think you've done us justice. We are a B2B software investor that purely invest in European founders with global ambition.
And I think, just to add some context to our listeners and viewers, right? This is an interesting podcast episode because we're going to talk about AI. Well, everyone's talking about AI, but we're going to talk from a slightly different perspective, more focused in our industry, right? So here we have someone, I don't know if you're the only one, but you're probably the only one I know, that is really focusing a lot of time and resources in building AI for a VC firm, right? And so that's really going to be the focus here. We're not necessarily going to talk about AI trends from an investment perspective, but really from a practitioner perspective. So that's kind of cool. If you're excited about that, stay tuned, subscribe, follow us, you know the drill. Ties, I like to start with kind of showcasing the person the person that we're featuring. I was very much surprised to hear about your life story, and I don't want to kind of ruin it for anyone, so I won't hint into anything. But could you give us a bit of background on you and how you came to where you are today?
My most formative experience is that I've had 5 brain surgeries in my life. I was born with a brain condition called hydrocephalus, which means you have too much water around your brain. And my condition was very, very severe. So the best way how I can describe how I felt on a day-to-day basis is as if you had espresso martini, a shot of tequila, and 3 glasses of white wine. You have to wake up slightly earlier than normal the next day. And you just feel a little off all the time. But then 3 or 4 times a week, I would get migraine attacks. And because the root cause of them is slightly different, the intensity would be very different. So part of the migraine attacks would be temporary blindness. So my vision would just go sometimes with one eye, sometimes both. My arms or legs would stop working well. The pain would be bad enough to vomit. I hope no one's eating whilst this. And sometimes all of the above. And it could really take hours or sometimes even a full day to sort of regain full motor skills or vision. So I was a very, very sick kid. So also I think when I tell this to people that don't have kids, they go, "Oh, you poor thing. How did you make it through?" When I tell this to people that have parents, they're like, "Well, I hope you really spoil mom and dad on Father's Day and Mother's Day," which I try to do. I don't think I'll ever do justice, but I do my best. I grew up incredibly sick as a kid. Like I can probably count on 1 or 2 hands the number of weeks where I was able to attend a full school day 5 days a week. And on top of that, I always expected to die very young because, the pressure in your brain to be bad enough where your body thinks, I'm sure vomiting is going to make you feel better, or where your vision goes is very, very intense. So I always found this scary growing up because the pain is horrible and it would come on quite quickly. So some days I would wake up and I'd feel, my version of fine, which is basically really hungover. And then it could go from really hungover to really the most crushing pain I think I've ever experienced. My pain tolerance is high. I broke 5 bones in my right hand during a mountain bike race, and I finished a mountain bike race when I was 23. So I think generally I don't suffer from man flu, but I was just an extremely sick kid. And then at age 20, I'm doing this internship in New York, and I get brought to the hospital against my will. And there's this American doctor who basically says, I've interpreted the scans, and our condition, my interpretation of your condition is different, and you should have surgery. I have a long talk with my parents where I also explained to them that I was sick much more often than they realized. So I think typically, right, when you have a child or a loved one and they're sick a lot, it's useful to know that they're sick and the extent to which they're sick, because then you can do something, right? Like if I come home and my fiance is like, passed out on the floor, then obviously I want to call an ambulance. It's just that I'd spent my entire childhood in hospitals and ambulances. I've had more than 280 overnight stays in a hospital in my life. So I really, and that excludes the day trips, right? So I really spent my entire life in and around hospitals. And my poor parents obviously would get very upset when they would see me, right, pass out on the floor, or they would hear that actually I came home 15 minutes after leaving for school and spent the whole day being sick. So I tried to hide it from my parents as much as I could. So like if I'd be sick all over myself, I would get rid of the gym clothes that I was sick in. And then my parents would sometimes ground me. They're like, "Man, you're so irresponsible. I can't believe you lost another pair of shoes. Like, you really need to become an adult at some point." So I tried to shield my parents as much and hide the extent to which I was sick as much as I could growing up. So once they understood that, they were also supportive of the surgery. And this surgery at age 20 in New York just completely fixed everything. So I weighed 67. I'm like 6'5" or 196 meters tall. I was 67 kilos, like 165 pounds or something when I came out of that surgery, which is extremely, extremely thin. It's not a great look. I wake up at age 20, and even with 230 plus stitches in my head, because it's proper brain surgery, right? Like, you really cut you open and install a pump and it goes to your stomach. Like, it's not a pleasant experience. And even then, I realized I felt so much better than I could remember feeling. So I really had this Walt Disney second lease of life, especially when you're obviously in the Big Apple. You're like, you can be anything you want. And now I really felt unencumbered by my body because, yeah, I did well on standardized testing when I was young. In the Netherlands, we don't have SATs. We have something called the CITO. I scored a perfect CITO when I was 13, despite, average school attendance of 3-4 days a week. I just always found it very frustrating. I'm like, I have a decent engine. It's just stuck in this shopping cart trolley with 3 wheels. And post-surgery, I was like, I have a car, right? The car engine is in the car, and I can do anything. And of course, that's not true. So there's a lot of things I suck at. But I really felt like, what do I do with my life now? And then a friend of mine said, well, you're good with numbers. You have a very preppy haircut, and you're just very relentlessly optimistic. Like, you're gritty, right? You can deal with crap with a smile on your face. And if someone's going to ask you to please redo the entire PowerPoint presentation at 2 a.m. on Saturday, you will handle it with much less attitude than many people your age. So I'm like, great. I now have a vision for where to go in life because I'm not going to die before 25 and I won't be in a wheelchair. I reached out to about 74 different bankers and people on LinkedIn, basically pitched my story. A couple of people were nice enough to have coffee with me. One of them worked at Deutsche Bank, ended up getting an opportunity to intern at Deutsche Bank, the 2 internships there. For the first time post-surgery, my health was getting slightly worse because working till 2 a.m. is quite tough. And maybe I'm just lazy. I didn't handle it very well. Learned a lot. So I thought that was exciting. Very sharp people. They work very hard. Ended up pivoting into tech. Started my career afterwards at Google. Went from sales to strategy and operation. I did a law degree and a stats degree. So that's why I have a weird profile all around. Went from sales to strategy and operations role, which includes a lot of data. Taught myself data science and data engineering to move into Google Health, to basically work at teams that apply AI for medical imaging, similar to the brain condition that I had. The last job I had at Google was running a big revenue reporting team. So basically target setting, reporting pipelines, creating the slides for executives, creating the dashboarding, just to steer the business in ads for a couple of $1 billion of revenue. And then I was at a dinner with a bunch of people in London that work in venture capital. And I was like, these people are so smart and they work so hard. Why do they all have to leave early to fix quarterly reporting? Like, what do you need this is 2023 at the time. I'm like, my team, and I ran a team of like 3 people. We can do 14 executive presentations plus all the BI decking, plus all the sales bonus payouts, like just the whole thing on like $30+ billion of revenue. And it's pretty seamless. And the way that these people are describing how this core process runs just sounds like a nightmare. So I then got hugely excited about basically taking my skills and just sort of knowledge about how you can transform processes with software and AI and applying that in a completely different context. I interviewed with a couple of firms. Anyone that's met Norman, especially, who's the founder and general partner at Dawn, he's a very big personality. And when you meet him, you want to work for him. So I really liked Norman. I really liked the other people I met at Dawn. And there's just a real curiosity about doing things differently. So he was one of the few GPs that I spoke with when I was interviewing that was totally happy to try and do core reporting in a completely different way than all the other funds do it, and more similar to how it's done at Google. And also was open-minded enough about things like Rolodex, which we'll talk about later.
Well, I think I have to start off by saying, thank you. You shared a lot there. I'm a lot about some tough years in your life as well, which is a big chunk of it, right? I think the only, I don't want to dive too much into it either, but I guess the only one question I have is really how has that changed your perspective today? And of course, personally is interesting, but also as someone who's active in venture, do you think it gives you an edge in any way or not at all? It's just a matter of perspective and philosophy.
When you've genuinely feared for your life for 20 years and had another surgery a year and a half ago, it just gives a lot of perspective. And I see this with a lot of people that work at great funds, and they were top of their class in high school, and then they were top of their class at Cambridge, and they were top of their class at McKinsey, JP Morgan, and then they top of the class at the first fund, and top of the class at the second fund. And then they get told on a specific deal or thing like, hey, this just wasn't up to the bar. And they just really struggle with this. And I think because I've just really been faced with near-death experiences for 20+ years, by comparison, when you wake up and you're like, my legs don't work, it's okay if my technical product doesn't work. Like I have a high par and I want to achieve great things, but I think I handle some of the inevitable snags you get when you're trying to build technology and apply AI in a way that really elevates how we run everything at Dawn. You're going to break some eggs if you're going to try to make an omelet like this. There's also no one else's homework to copy, where we really have some certain areas where we really do things differently than all the other funds. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's harder. Sometimes you get the feedback that isn't, oh my God, this is amazing. But you get, hey, your V1 is, I'm really a V1. That's a big piece. And I think the second one is there's a healthy skepticism against experts in some way and like how things are done. Because for the first 20 years of my life, every single hostel I would go to, and I really can't overstate how sick I was as a kid. And the doctor's like, well, we reviewed the guidelines. And according to the guidelines, which is how the other hostels do it, and the other doctors do it, you're fine. And I sort of see similar bits in VC where I think on how people accept the technology that's available to leverage relationships or to prepare meetings or to do important things like get the quarterly reporting deck in order. Most funds have a pretty awful process compared to what's possible. They're pretty awful, they just don't leverage technology and AI well at all compared to what's really possible. But everyone does it this way and everyone's sort of fine with it. I think I have pretty thick skin. If I really think you can do it differently, you should do it differently, then I'm happy to keep banging on the drum to do things differently. And then I think finally, there's been a lot of moments in my life where if things had gone differently, my outcome in life would be radically different. So, I try to work hard and I try to be kind to people and I take my job seriously, and I go to bed on time. I really try to play my cards right. But if any of my surgeries would not have happened or went poorly, or when I was 5, my parents got very strong advice to send me to special needs school because I was so sick. So I wasn't doing particularly well at school at the age 5. And my parents, I think quite unreasonably, disagreed with the teacher, disagreed with the principal of the school. It escalated to like the regional school board where my mom and dad told all these people that have been working in academics or education their whole life, right? And they're not bad people. And they disagreed with all of them and said, no, our kid doesn't need to go to special needs school. And we're also not bad parents. We'll parent differently. And you just wait and see in 3 months or, these will be fine. But if I had slightly more reasonable parents, that would have been like, wow, 15 experts all disagree with us on this. Maybe this is where I get it from. Or for whatever reason, right? Like if my parents would have at a personal point not had the capacity or the bandwidth to push back really hard. I mean, if I would have gone to special needs school, realistically, I'm much closer to the janitor and the cleaner at Dawn than being able to have the humongous privilege of being on this podcast.
Thank you for raising the bar for our little podcast here. No, but it's a bit off topic, but I feel like talking about it, so let's talk about it. This thing around experts, right? And maybe let's connect it to AI, right? Now with the rise of AI, I think it's never been easier to kind of question expert views. You mentioned doctors, you mentioned teachers, right? I think those are very two concrete examples that people talk about all the time. I have some cousins in university and they were here last week literally bitching about their teachers and how they could learn things better by just like using ChatGPT or Google or Mix or whatever other AI tools. I had another conversation 2 days ago with a business partner of mine where he was talking about the fact that he was misdiagnosed for something on, there was some nerve issue that he had, and he went to a bunch of doctors, nothing really sorted out, put it in ChatGPT. It suggested some exercises. He got better 2 days after, right? And so it's never been easier to disagree, right? Or to question. How do you think about this from not necessarily a technological perspective, but also from us as a society, and like, where's this going to lead us to?
It's a very big question, and I
know it's a very big question, and you might not have what you think is an answer. So maybe how do you think about it, right? As well, how do you face life, knowing that?
I think one thing that I find an interesting paradigm shift now, and I'm going with something relatively tactical, which is like, I don't know, I get asked to prepare research on something. You can now produce a plausible sounding pretty big piece of research just so quickly, right? Like you throw it in ChatGPT, you spend 5 minutes on the prompt, you come back an hour later, and you have 15 pages. You can produce stuff 100 times faster than you could ever read stuff. You can read it much slower than you can make sense of a lot of stuff. So I think there's an interesting piece now where, and I find it striking with ChatGPT, where there's many aspects that are where the use case is fantastic. You can get a lot of value out of it, especially if you don't just do an ad hoc prompt, but you actually spend some time building like something with LangChain, or like you build a product just for this use case, where the ratio between value to hallucination gets really, really exciting. I think what I find striking is a lot of people, when they talk about where is AI, they talk about, well, I spent 5 minutes on a prompt in the front end on this very, very broad AI model, and the output wasn't perfect, right? And I think sometimes you can only tell that the output isn't perfect on something that you know well, like on a topic that I know nothing almost about. I'm like, wow, this sounds really plausible, right? And on something where I think I have a bit of knowledge, right? Like on how to code or something. This isn't how you do it. It's terrible. Or I think sort of the next frontier is that you'll get more specialized builds for some of these pieces. Because, for example, one of the products we build is when we have a founder meeting, I want to have a good summary that is deep enough that it's useful, but is digestible enough that I can read it, about what these people do. And even as a massive nerd, I meet founders now all the time, and I am like, man, I'm looking at the website, and actually I would need an hour to figure out what do they actually do, what would be the customer for this. I mean, it also tells you how crappy the website is, that like ideally I should be able to figure this by skimming, but 90% of the time you can't. Understand who are the competitors in the space, and then also understand how is their angle or narrative or product parity different from the competitor. So this is something where out of the box, ChatGPT works pretty crap, especially for finding competitors. It might get better over time, but I think also the VC, like what we consider competitors is different than what the average use case will be. So this is, I think, one of those where I hear people saying, well, ChatGPT won't get there, or AI won't get there because it doesn't work well in the front end. But by spending a month of engineering effort to build something that automatically skins calendars and prepares meeting notes, call it Rolodex Intel, about what they do, about who sits on the cap table, about who are the competitors, how do they compare, and then draft some questions at the top. Out of the box, it's not, it seems nice until you actually try using it in a founder meeting. It's just not good enough yet, because like we don't do high volume, right? We don't have 5,000 BDRs running around and we churn and burn accounts. Like realistically, it's very sort of white glove. But after a month, you can really see how good it can be for that specific use case.
Well, let's build on that. So now you're talking about, kind of using, leveraging, and building tech within our industry. We typically ask this question to all our guests: 3 biggest learnings. And in your case, I'm going to anchor it to building tech for the venture industry. So what have been your 3 biggest learnings doing that?
One learning that I've gotten from, I think, other people that do my job, because I'm definitely not the only one. That's sort of like and Dawn isn't the only fund that's invested heavily on building their own tech function. It is one of the very few. I think it's one of the industries, one of the bits where actually PE is more progressive than VC. There's a whole bunch of PE
for sure
now have a proper tech function, invest in it heavily, pay material salaries. Like the amount of VC funds that I know that are like, yeah, we invested in 2 ex-Google founders, pre-seed, pre-idea, pre-revenue, pre-everything, and we gave them 25 posts. And then they're celebrating this because they're like, well, that seems reasonable. But then I'm like, well, would you just spend $500,000 to $1 million a year to build a function, to build software and set up your software and find AI use cases and build things that would elevate every single person in your firm? They go, ooh, that sounds really expensive, man. That sounds really expensive. And I'm like, what are those things? Like, they both have to be true or they're both false, right? Like either they're really valuable people and technology is exciting, it's exciting and it's worth investing in, or it's.
Well, the other argument we hear, because to your point of PE versus VC, right? The other point that I have heard multiple times is like, oh, well, in venture, especially early stage, right? We're investing into companies like there's no data, like there's nothing. PE is very different. You know, you have these, depending of what type of PE, right? So that's another argument. I don't know if you want to refute it as well or comment it.
I mean, almost all the great tech people at PE spend all their time with portfolio work. Because in PE, especially when you buy out, you'll have majority stake, if not full, 100% stake. So that means that per dollar of Ties's time or salary, if you improve the portfolio company, you own 100% the value you create, which makes the economics much more attractive. Also, you would hope that if you buy if you do some kind of car wash roll-up play or small IT vendors roll-up play in the Midlands, like I would hope that, the caliber of IT and tech talent there is not first class, so that there's stuff you can do, right? Like I would hope if you buy Asda that you can do stuff on the ERP that's not already in place. Whereas if we would be looking at a bunch of founders and I have a conversation with them for 2 hours and their mind is blown. They're like, oh my God, I never thought you could do this. We should really not be backing those people, right? Like the best technical founders we back in should be able to tell me stuff, or at least be on par, I think, on a lot of the technical fronts. I think one big learning I had going into VC is I coming from Google, where people love software and they love tinkering with software and they love figuring out little scripts. And like, I remember showing someone at Google that you can automatically color code meetings based on some rules and some logics and some, so that you don't have to manage, because I pretty OCD. I like color coding my calendar, and you can just set up some logic that this gets done automatically, so I don't have to do it manually. And I remember showing it to someone at Google who worked in sales, and within a week, I'd gone like 4 emails because I went on holiday, and I come back and there's all these people that have like played around with it, had questions, iterated on it, implemented it, rolled it out to other people. Like people really like software. I think even software investors don't have a software background. So I think if you build something, it needs to be great. Even if what you're competing against is Excel and manual, the expectation actually, I think, is very high. And I think the second thing is that culturally, a lot of the internal projects that you have at a VC can just go quite quickly, right? So I don't know, we realized that for our LP meetings, the part of our deck, our story around why Europe is exciting, isn't very exciting, right? Like we should fix this. So we've decided this, going from idea to now we have a better piece of that, or changing something in our pipeline or changing something in our CRM management, goes pretty fast. When you do tech builds, it can take 6 months for some of the plumbing, and there's 6 really tough months without seeing much change in the front end. And I think this is a cultural appetite that a lot of funds don't have, just because in order to build great products and great AI applications and technology, you need to have a much longer breath than you do, I think, to be an investor, where I think you can be pretty great by being relatively reactive.
It's interesting your point about it having to be great, because I feel it goes a bit in a perfect, or whatever the exact word was that you used, doesn't really matter, but it goes a bit against the grain with like this trends around like vibe coding and whatnot. And like, what, kind of if we start tuning into, content and whatever that's being produced around AI, generally speaking, right? Not specific to venture, it goes a bit against the grain, right?
Mm-hmm. It does.
What are the pros and cons there for us as an industry, right? Because let's be honest, most of European ventures early stage, most of that is emerging managers. Most of it is not perfect. Most of it makes mistakes by design, right? And so it feels like there's something here that doesn't really hold up in the narrative. I don't know. At least to me, it feels, I don't know if you have the same feeling or not.
So it depends on the cultural DNA. I think a lot of the established funds might just be slightly more old-fashioned, although then again, you look at the profile of a lot of people that start funds, and they've also worked at, McKinsey for a whole bunch of years. And it's also not like they spent 15 years running tech teams at Palantir before, right? So I think that probably holds true across. I think venture capital is relatively new to tech, and probably embracing tech and leading tech teams and having engineers as a core piece of the corporate DNA. I think what makes me excited about this is, might not be the nicest thought, but I care less about what the other funds are doing. To me, it's great that a lot of these other GPs are really dragging their feet and unwilling to commit to actually just getting a tech function in-house and are unwilling to just get paid good market salaries for a couple of great people versus try to get some cheap graduate and dip their toe in. I'm like, if it's 2025, and you still are so on the fence about technology and AI that you need to dip your toe in for your internal hire, great. It's one less competitor as far as I'm concerned. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for us by the fact that a lot of other firms are so risk averse or culturally resistant.
What do you think? And this is more kind of you advising other teams and other firms. What do you think are like the easy pickings in terms of tech adoption in venture? And that might be build or buy, right? It might be both, a mix, whatever, right? What do you think are the easy pickings?
Building software, and again, this goes against the vibe coding piece. I think most software sucks. Most software didn't get built with the ambition that it's going to suck, right? Like most apps for your phone, people have big dreams and great ideas. And it's just surprisingly hard to make something that people really want to use. If you can buy, it's almost always cheaper if you're a fund at least the size of Dawn. Maybe it's different if you're like a 4-person shop or a 2-person shop, and then also distribution and enablement and all this kind of stuff is really easy because there's 4 people at the table. So like then it's easier. But I think once you get to Dawn's size and there's about 30 people involved, 10 investors, 12 investors, some of them have obviously been humongously successful doing things a certain way. I think then making something that's going to work well for a big chunk of those people is non-trivial. I started rambling a little bit. Can you remind me?
Easy pickings. What are the easy pickings? Whether that's build or whether that's buy doesn't really matter.
I think the easy pickings are make sure that you have a CRM, that you have set it up correctly. And I think if you don't have an engineering training or a proper data background, right? Like proper data engineering or something, I think it might be hard for you to see all the possible opportunities because we've done a lot of sort of like power drills or automations on top of Affinity or CRM. But the way that Affinity is now set up, and we just squeeze a lot more juice out of it than we did 2.5 years ago. So I think that is easy picking. There's been some things where I was like, we can just buy a solution for this in terms of how we message, in terms of how we keep track of people, in terms of there's a bunch of things where you can buy a solution and pick a better solution also like on your finance system. I think for a lot of the builds, I found and I came in this with typical arrogance of an ex-Google engineer that did a lot of data engineering and a lot of NT resolution. And I'm like, well, I did the hard stuff at Google and now I get to sort of, hack something together in a couple of months. They're going to look at me like I invented fire. And I thought that data engineering was a surprisingly hard problem. If you look in Affinity, you type in a certain person, there will be like 5 versions of Ties Boukema because there's one with my Gmail address, one with my side business address, one with my Dawn address, one with my Dawn with a .co.uk address. And there's different meetings and like the data is incredibly fragmented because each entity, each Ties Boukema is very, very fragmented. In order to pull that together and present that in a clear, easy view, like how we're now doing with some of these Rolodex products, was a fiendishly difficult task. And we end up building this massive entity resolution solution, which we probably worked on for 6 months, which involves a whole bunch of AI, not LLMs, but like really forecasting models to try and figure out, well, if it's this type of name, what is the type of, if it's a Spanish sounding name, actually the logic for which piece of the string needs to match. Like it was 5 steps harder than I would have thought it would be. So I think when you really start building something exciting, I think you really want to get some kind of professional help and have that person in-house that's fully committed, that has a probation and wants to build a career there. So also they can take all the feedback in passing. I'm calling it feedback. Often it's just shit, right? For the first couple of months until it gets, for months, for half a year before it gets good enough.
Let's talk about Rolodex a bit. So first time I heard about Rolodex was in Milan with you, actually. I had the pleasure of hosting a panel. I believe it was at 0100 Milan in October-ish or so last year. And we had the pleasure of sharing the stage with a couple of other speakers. So we couldn't really dive deep. So for those that weren't there and had never heard of Rolodex, give us a quick rundown and share some insights as well of what is it? How does it help you as a firm? What were some of the struggles? Any lessons learned? All the good stuff.
I naively, when I came into Dawn, thought the big problem was sourcing. And with sourcing, I mean surfacing relevant companies for investors to have a look at and finding the right signals outside in. Now, if you're really early stage, I see the value potentially in going really deep. We have a nice tech stack on there to make sure that we don't miss anything and we see everything relevant in the market. But I think the real value in VC gets created through relationships. And the light bulb moment I had is maybe 2 months in. There was an exciting fintech deal in Nordics. The deal team was trying incredibly hard to get in touch with founders. They kept getting basically blown off or pushed back a little bit. By the time we finally get in front of the founders, and Dawn prides itself on being a very research heavy, you can call it nerdy, but very research heavy firm. So by the time we show up to the founders, we've spoken to for an in-person meeting, we'll often have consulted external experts that are very expensive, reach out to people in our network, done our own proper, we do a lot of research. And this is expensive from a time perspective and just from a cost perspective when we bring in external resources. And we show up at this founder call and we present the findings back. And the founder goes, "This is amazing stuff, super useful, really blown away. But also I took money from Index 3 days ago, so maybe see you guys." And Norman, the co-founder at Dawn, he comes back the next day and he's moaning about this at his board meeting. He's like, "Man, I'm really annoyed, and I feel like we had such a great sort of right to win. We've had IZETL and Tink. We've had 2 B2B European payments unicorns. Like, why didn't they pick us? Really wish we were earlier." And then 2 people on the board say, "Well, Norman, Anna and I are angel investors. Why don't you just ask? Like, we've been on this board for 6 years. Why don't you just ask us? We would love to give you an introduction because we love you. We love Dawn. You guys are great. You have these big unicorns. Like, why didn't you ask?" Right? So he comes back to the deal team, and we were in a much smaller, much less fancy office 2.5 years ago. So you could hear fruitful language throughout the office, basically going, "Why didn't you ask me?" Right? And there was a pass. "Why didn't you ask me to make the pass?" Like, well, how am I supposed to know that you sit on a board with someone that's an angel investor? Which is fair enough, right? Like, it won't show in Affinity, it won't show in your CRM, it won't show on LinkedIn, it won't show on Boardex. But it really seemed like a knowable problem to me. So the whole genesis of Rolodex is, rather than trying to take the human fully out of the loop with AI-driven sourcing, it's about how do you supercharge relationships through AI. So there's different ways how Rolodex, had it existed 2.5 years ago, would have helped Norman get in and us win the deal. And it sends a automated piece of meeting intel via email in the morning. This is basically your pre-read for the day. If you have founder meetings, it'll tell you what do they do, who sits on the cap table, how would we know those people on the cap table or advisors. It drafts questions that make you hopefully sound smart and understand the space better and get closer to an equity story for that business. It helps understand competitors. It just helps you have a much better call than you could for first and second calls. And realistically, you can otherwise. And now that I'm doing founder calls, I realize how much I was flailing in the dark sort of before this. If you would have an investor meeting, like a board, it'll flag the relevant deals that you should talk about, whether they're in Affinity currently or not. And if they're in Affinity already and there's some notes, then like it would surface that, hey, actually you sit on the board with Anna, you have a board meeting at 6 p.m. Anna's an angel investor in FinTech X that we've been trying to get in touch with. So Norman would have just seen a big red target deal, talk to Anna very obviously in his face. I would have been able to organically bring this up in the board meeting. The second way how it would have helped us get in is we've represented our network as a knowledge graph. This has who we've met, who's worked at Dawn, boards we sit on, advisory roles we hold, phone contacts. People can share phone contacts and WhatsApp contacts in a privacy safe way so they can screen out everything that they're not willing to share. And there's a proxy for how strong that relationship is on WhatsApp. But the combination of calendar data, boards, co-investments, work experience, that kind of stuff, and WhatsApp contacts per person gives us an unbelievably good view of who we know really well and which of those connections would have a high fidelity path to this fintech, to David at EUVC, at whatever it would be. So deal team would have just run Rolex Access the second they're realizing they're getting stonewalled. Now it's actually running proactively for a lot of interesting deals. So they would have just surfaced, hey, actually Norman has a fantastic pass. It's sort of a 2-hop kind of thing. And then the final one, we typically write checks between like 8 and 40 million US. So there's really a big ecosystem of earlier stage investors. And I think it's very important for us to be very deliberate about which of those earlier stage investors have a good track record, right? Who gets follow-up rounds, who's done the bigger rounds. Just a quantitative view of sort of an approximation of sort of the power score, both for deal partners. So you can also flag the rising stars coming up through the ranks. I think it's much more meritocratic because it doesn't matter what the fund name is. It's really about which deals do these people do. The same thing holds for angels. We map this with who do we meet and who do we have WhatsApp relationships with. And then as a team, we could just divide and conquer with everything in front of us and be like, there's certain nodes in the European ecosystem that really matter, and we are not close enough with them. And, again, this might be less of a problem if you're a 2-person fund to understand who's close with who. But when you have 12 investors and some people join and some people leave, it becomes harder to be 100% confident that you're allocating time as proactively as possible. So we have this thing called Rolodex coverage, which we have a data-driven view of sort of a power score per investor, per fund, per angel investor. And then we can just assign owners to certain people and be like, Henry, your objective for next quarter is to have catch-ups with these 16 people and to try and make friends with those 5. And if you fail to make friends with those 5, basically you tag someone else in and you try if Daniela with her warm smile can break things open, or if Evgeny with her smile can break things open, or whatever it would be, right? So we're much more intentional also now for events, and like the whole thing interplays, right? So also then when we do an event, this is another painful one about this fintech deal. We had hosted 2 of the founders at a summer drinks event like 2 months prior. But this doesn't pull through, right? Because Gatsby doesn't talk to Affinity, and this is also what's useful to have a tech person because they can set up the plumbing. But like we had them there, and at the time we already thought they were exciting. So what should have happened is that before the event, you run the guest list. As people come in, they get tagged by reception. So reception will be like, hey, Henry, this deal you're really keen on, or hey, Norman, this person's coming up. And you can even chat strategy before. So like we do this much, much more cleverly now, where we run Rolex Intel before events come in. We're much more data-driven with events invites as well, because like this really drove me up the wall. We do these fancy dinners in Paris, Michelin star places. And then it's just a blank sheet. It's like, well, let me know which, SaaS or AI founders in Paris we should invite. This is an awful way to figure out as a starting point. Awful way, right? Because like in between your 6th and your 7th meeting, you're hoping that the investor is like has a perfect memory and stack ranking of the first cut should be data-driven and tech-enabled because it saves time and it helps you figure out gaps. And you can go through with a marker and be like, well, that person's already coming to ski trips, maybe not, or that person we had an awful experience with, or I heard. There's always a qualitative overlay, but the starting point should be tech-enabled.
A lot there. Thank you for sharing that third one. That third one is very interesting. And I think and you mentioned this, like where things get really interesting is when they become synergetic, all of them, right? When they connect
for sure,
yeah, to each other. I want to ask this, and I think you've hinted to it a tiny bit, which is kind of what is a strongly held belief that you've had that you've had to change your mind on recently? I don't know if it's connected to venture or not, but if it is, even better.
I held the opinion quite strongly until about 2.5 years ago when I actually started working at Dawn, that really you should be able to take the human kind of out of a lot of pieces in private markets. And I think on honestly, anything from actually deciding do we want to back these founders, to sourcing them, to knowing what's exciting, I think relationships and humans are key and will remain key. The big opportunity, I think, is to augment the human with technology. So what I mean by that is, in November earlier this year, we announced an investment in a company we did called Deep Dots. Headcount on Deep Dots was kind of flat. Earlier stage investors were good, but it's not like a Sequoia seed or something where everyone in market gets FOMO. TAM is interesting. Website was a little crappy at the time. The reason we got hugely excited about this is because I worked with Nima, one of the co-founders at Google, and Nima's the sharpest, most founder profile person I've worked with in 5.5 years at Google by quite a bit. Part of why I got excited is like, it's B2B software, it's European. Nima has a monster ambition. He's going after big TAM. We should talk with Nima. I don't see possibly how outside in you would ever get that type of information and get the type of reference outside in about a founder, right? Like you can analyze what they've written on LinkedIn, tone of voice, and stuff, but nothing will come close to actually the power of relationships there. What would be silly is like if the deal team would have passed, and like, what are the reasons we managed to get in touch with it? I got pulled into this deal is because someone said, hey, there's this deal done by a Nordic VC that we like, and you have a WhatsApp relationship with Nima. Can you tell us about Nima? And I'm like, oh crap, you founded a company. That's huge, we should catch up, blah, blah, blah. The fact that humans are core in private markets and I think will always remain core in private markets is something I was very skeptical about 2.5 years ago, where I thought it's going to be full Moneyball, it's going to be full quants, both for selection and for the investment processes. I think there's so many variables and there's so little commonality actually across the, 10 unicorns or something we've done, from founder dynamics, from TAM, from how they come across, from and also from our misses. There's actually, we do a proper post-mortem for a lot of the misses. Some of them are painful and kind of hilarious to read, right? It's where you read people go, I don't know, I think the guy's vision isn't that clear. And then it becomes a multi unicorn. And you're like, I think the guy's vision was fine. That's the biggest thing I've changed my mind on, that it should all be augmenting the human versus trying to take the human out.
Yeah. I like that, the transparency topic about private markets, right? It's kind of interesting that you're hinting to that in a way, that it's so intransparent, and that's part of the magic of it, right? That's sure. What you need to navigate. Yeah. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Final question. The way I wrap up every single episode now, what's the last book you read that truly inspired you?
There's a neurosurgeon at Harvard called Atul Gawande, and he writes in a very clear, very open style. I find some of his books quite tough to read, not because they're poorly written, but just because I've had 5 brain surgeries myself. So when he talks about mistakes he's made on the operating table, cutting into someone that has hydrocephalus, I'm like, just be more than it does. But what I find mind-blowing, I always thought if you're a manager, right, you need tight process and checklists if you are managing not very motivated, not very skilled, not very smart people. And if you have motivated, smart, skilled people, they figure it out. It's like sort of free markets, And in VC, I don't know, speak for Don, we have very motivated, very smart, very skilled people working. So I thought that there's no real point in checklists. But the point he makes is the reason why plane crashes have gone down massively. And obviously there was an Air India flight recently, but statistically, right, plane crashes have just fallen, no pun intended, but fallen off an absolute cliff. Right? It's so much safer to fly than it was 50, 60 years ago. And part of that is the tech, but a huge part of that is process and checklists. And even Harvard neurosurgeons, where it's hard to make the case that they're not motivated, they're not smart, and they're not skilled, they increasingly rely on checklists and process. And this has been something that I read 9 months ago, and I gave a copy of the book to a bunch of the GPs, the partners, principals. Most people don't. Some people even read the book, and we're much more intentional, I think, as a result about doing process thinking. So when it comes to writing an IC memo, what are questions we need to have asked? What is the type of benchmarking that really matters? To try and add more process. And again, there's still a lot of space, right? Because for 2 deals, maybe in one deal, it's 100% down to founder and execution. For the other piece, there's a piece of TAM or why now or industry trends that plays a bigger role. So there is flexibility, but we're much more process driven and do a lot more process thinking than we did probably 9 months ago.
That's cool. I like that. That's also learning for us here at EUVC. We also have that vision, very much of, I don't really look at people as employees, right? We look at them as entrepreneurs in their own right, which, as you said, right, leads very well to this idea. Well, we don't need processes. We don't need to manage people. Things will naturally kind of figure themselves out. But yeah, we've learned sometimes the hard way that doesn't always work. So thank you for sharing that. I haven't read the book. I'll probably check it out soon. I think I'll enjoy it. Anyway, Ties, thank you for joining us at the EUVC Podcast. I hope you had a good time.
I did. It was a joy.
Yeah. It was awesome. Thank you for joining us. To everyone listening in, if you enjoyed this episode, remember to give us a review, positive one, I hope. Follow the pod and subscribe at EUVC, and you can check out Ties and Don on LinkedIn, social media, but also on their website. And I'm sure if you reach out, Rolodex will help them follow up the best way with you. Thank you for tuning in.
We're hosting exclusive off-the-record LP AMAs, bringing together the people behind the capital who are shaping the next generation of venture funds. If you're in the middle of raising a fund or planning to and want to understand how LPs actually make decisions, this is the room you want to be in. No pitch decks, no posturing, no script. Just honest conversations between GPs and LPs. The upcoming AMA on the 21st of August is held by Jonathan Sibilia, partner at Bullhound Capital, and one of Europe's most experienced LPs. Before Bullhound, he led fund-of-funds and secondaries at Molten Ventures for 16 years, deploying into 80-plus VC funds and backing breakout names like UiPath, Revolut, and Ledger. Jonathan brings a rare dual lens of direct investments and secondaries across thousands of fund reviews and real DPI outcomes. This is your chance to ask one of Europe's sharpest LPs how they really assess managers, secondaries, exit strategies, and what most GPs still get wrong, or anything else you're dying to know. Access to these AMAs are limited to EUVC community members. Don't miss your chance to be in the room. Head to eu.vc/subscribe to save your seat.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.